Hey guys, all right, filming in my car again, so if the phone falls, I'm sorry. Um, I'll have a better setup at some point. Um, again, I'm traveling this summer, so a lot of these will probably be in my car, honestly. Um, yeah, so today's video is about trauma and the cycle of violence. I'm actually taking a course on trauma in school. And I'm sorry, it's always a difficult topic, but it's necessary. Um, so I was talking with my friend Steven, who I'll be having on at some point later, and we were just talking about anime, and we started talking about Attack on Titan. And if you haven't seen that show, I encourage you to watch it. It's, I love anime, so I'm a huge nerd, but it's one of the most incredible stories ever, regardless of the platform. It's or the anime or live action or whatever. It's just so it's an incredible story. And Steven and I were talking about it, and it was very emotional. We basically arrived at the conclusion that what was happening towards the end of that show is happening right now with the Israeli genocide of Gaza. And the implications are huge. On the one hand, it's just an anime about monsters and wars and stuff like that. So it's nothing that should, it should just be a show, right? But how it's written is so incredibly, it's hard to find the words, because it's equally hard to find the words about how unbelievable the atrocities committed by the IDF, by the Israeli government, and with the overwhelming majority of the population of Israel, supports this genocide, supports these unimaginably cruel war crimes that are being committed. I mean, it's hard for me to even talk about it without getting emotional, and I don't think anyone can honestly think or talk about these things without getting emotional if you really know what's going on, and you really pay attention to what's going on. It's just a nightmare. So anyway, we were talking, and we said, yeah, this is the situation that's going on there. And essentially what I'm referring to is a cycle of violence, of victimization, and of re-victimization by the hands of the victims. And I think it's important because, one, this happens at the individual level. right? This happens with individuals who were abused as children, probably never had a safe place in their entire lives, end up committing violence against others in adolescence, in adulthood, and, they become criminals. And if they don't get caught, they become abusers themselves. And it doesn't just happen at the individual level, right? These aren't just isolated individual cases. I mean, with what's going on in Gaza, we're talking about an entire culture, an entire society, right? And that doesn't mean every single person in that society approves of this. They don't. But the overwhelming majority of them do. It's just a statistical fact, right? It's not, it's not, hearsay. It's a statistical fact that over 80% of Israeli citizens are in support of the genocide that's occurring right now. So it's not just a few people scattered throughout society. It is entire societies. You can look to 9/11. In the aftermath of the unspeakable violence against civilians living in New York, who had done, no wrong, no violence towards Al-Qaeda, towards the terrorists responsible for 9/11. In the aftermath of all of that incredible violence, we immediately turned to do the exact same thing towards who we viewed and later learned had nothing to do with, as the people who had attacked us, right? Even though they didn't. And specifically, I'm referring to the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, Al-Qaeda was, responsible for, that's just a fact, for 9/11. And so our culture became the exact same way. Something bad happened to us. Something atrocious happened to us. Now it's time for us to do the exact same thing to other people. And we are justified in doing so. Why? Because something terrible happened to us. And I want to make this clear. As hideous and unbearably ignorant and stupid and wrong as this is, there are psychological, biological reasons that this occurs. We go into fight or flight mode, and I'll just say here there are, many more threat responses now that have been identified. It's no longer just fight, flight. There's also freeze, and depending on who you ask, there's a few others, and I'll talk about that in a different video as well. I think it's fight, flight, freeze, flop. That's basically like you just shut down, and you don't you get really tired, and you can't respond actively to what's happening. Kind of like just dissociating. And then I'm trying to think what the other one is. Oh, it's fawning. It's basically like you try to get on like the good side of the aggressor. So like you start acting really friendly, and even though they're being aggressive or just nasty or a dick or whatever, you start like fawning over them. And it's protective. It's not that you actually like them. It's that you're doing it as a protective measure to protect yourself, either physically or emotionally, psychologically, right? And these are ingrained responses that we have as living organisms, right? It's not, you're weak, you're a bitch, you're a coward, these responses in and of themselves are protective measures that our biological constitution has been evolutionarily adapted to enact in the face of violence and threat. It's not inherently bad. It becomes bad when it leads to behaviors that are violent and unjustified. Violence in the form of self-defense is justified. And personally, I see the number of times when self-defense is actually legitimate in terms of doing violence as exceedingly rare. Now, that's just my opinion. I can't prove that. There's no statistics to prove that. But personally, I think that a lot of times when we're talking about self-defense, it's just people waving their fucking dicks around, and somebody gets shot and dies as a result of it, when one or both parties could have just walked away. And, you tell a story to the police and maybe they buy it, maybe the jury buys it, but I think there's, you can goad someone into a fight, knowing that you're gonna kill them, or this stuff is not, beyond the pale. This stuff actually happens, and quite regularly. So anyway, that's a different conversation, but yes, it's even talking about violence is uncomfortable for me. I'm not like a macho, dude, so it's, yeah. And especially with all the violence that's going on now, it's unsettling, to say the least, to say the absolute least. But yeah, what I was saying was, it doesn't make us bad people that we have these instincts to respond with violence and anger and aggression. Those things come from a good place of wanting to protect ourselves and the people that we care about. But when we simply act from those instincts without considering, and again, I'm not talking about in an immediate self-defense situation where it's life or death and you have to make a decision like that. Obviously, in that case, you can't think about it. You have to make a decision like that. And if you don't, then you're fucking dead. Or people you love are dead. Or some other crazy shit happens, right? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about making decisions, conscious decisions, to commit violence that is unnecessary, that is unstrategic from a purely tactical standpoint, but more importantly than that, is just fundamentally unethical. Because when we succumb to those instincts, the only thing that we're left to do is operate on minimal information. And that obscures incredible nuance in situations. In terms of 9/11, that nuance means, oh yeah, actually this country didn't invade us. Actually, this country had nothing to do with 9/11. Whoops. And more than that, I think this is where I was going with all this. It leads us to dehumanize other people. Because it reaches a part of our brain that probably does dehumanize other people in that moment. I mean, think about it. If you are fighting for your life, having this like existential moment of like humanity, you know, whether or not you're right about it, having that existential like questioning in that moment of morality, that's probably going to get you killed. But where I'm going with all this is that even when terrible things happen to us, especially when terrible things happen to us, we cannot succumb to anger. Not just because it's not a good idea, not just because it's unstrategic, not just because, you know, we're prone to, make rash decisions and, in the heat of the moment get caught up in whatever. It's because if we do not contend with the reality that inside every single person is the potential for an abuser, is the potential to commit violence and abuse against other people. If we lose sight of that and choose not to heal, we are liable to do the exact same violence and abuse that has been committed against us to someone else. We had a discussion in class about this the other day, and that's why that's why I'm bringing this up now. Somebody had asked, is it really necessary for people to process narratively their trauma? And it's a good question, right? And we had a very good discussion about it. And I think the consensus was basically, no, it's not necessary because people don't need to fully heal to function in society. And I agree with that. I honestly do agree with that. You don't need to go all the way to the pit of your soul to be able to function healthily, to, have a stable job, have stable relationships, to be successful, right, in your profession or, in creative endeavors, whatever that looks like for you. It's not necessary to, go all the way down to the pit of terrible things that have happened to you in order to do all those things, right? But I would ask this, is that the standard that we want to set? Being able to do the bare minimum, being able to function in society. Because I'll remind you all, this society that we're trying to function in is the exact same society that's supporting an active genocide of now, I think, over 60,000 people, most of them children. Is that really the standard that we want to set for ourselves? I think it's time to stop trying to make ourselves conform to this mold of being able to function in society. There's a really great quote. I think it's Gabor Mate, or at least he used it in his book. It was something like, there's nothing healthy about functioning well in what is ultimately a very sick society. Something like that. But it's true. Why is that the standard that we're setting for ourselves? I would say, and the other thing that people said was, you can't push your clients, you can't, do that, you can't force people. And I agree. Because what would that even look like if we did, like, strap someone to a chair, or, like, you'd basically be torturing them, right? You'd be making them relive traumas that they didn't ask to relive, that they didn't want to relive, or, at least talk about it, whatever, and literally forcing them to try to heal. Like, in what way would that be healing, right? So that's obviously not a solution. But again, I'll make a separate, probably I'll write an article about it, because I have a lot to say about social work, but and psychotherapy as well. But I think that psychotherapy and social work are great aspirations. Just like, I think a lot of religions are great aspirations. I think that, kind of the scientific worldview that we've, come to know through, the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Like, I think all of those things are great aspirations, but they all fall short of the mark, at least when you take them, only in and of themselves, right? But even so, social work and psychotherapy, kind of pride themselves on this, like, oh, but we take a holistic approach, and we blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I really don't think that they do that very well, to be honest with you. But where was I going with that? But yeah, basically, what I was trying to say is that I think that social work and psychotherapy they're very limited in how they think about the world. And that's fine. Again, social work likes to pride itself on this, the person and the environment approach, and the, all these different backgrounds and whatever. And I really just don't see it in action. I see a lot of talk, but I don't see very much, like, substance, at all, really. There's a few good social workers out there, a few good therapists out there. I think most of the social work and psychotherapy that's done is honestly mediocre at best. And I don't say that as an insult. I just truly think that's the reality of the field. And so I think that psychotherapy and social work are very limited, right? well, yeah, as long, you're going to work and your relationships are stable and your finances are, yeah, so let's just play patty cake for the rest of our session together, right? And talk about nothing important, because that's easy as a clinician, that's easy as a client. And see, I'm already taking such a cynical view of this, and I think that's because, not the cynical part, but it's not an option to heal. It's an obligation to heal. And that's for the very reason that I said earlier. If you choose not to heal, there are plenty of people who don't even know what that means, and unfortunately maybe never will, right? Who have no understanding of mental health, trauma, just even thinking about your mind. It doesn't have to be psychology or psychotherapy, but just thinking about human nature and behavior and thought and existence, right? There are some people who, many people, entire societies and cultures that just do not think about these things, right? And it doesn't make them bad inherently as human beings. They just haven't been taught to think in those ways. So it's up to the people who are aware of these things to lead others, not because they're better, not because they're so special, not because I have this degree and that background and I worked at this agency and no, none of that. It is because in order for us to get out of the situation that we are in, a global crisis of meaning, of environmental catastrophe, of social collapse, in order for us to get out of this thing, we need to heal at a fundamental level of being human. And therefore, it is an obligation for people who are aware, even just a little bit, to begin the path of healing and to continue it to the best of their abilities. And I'll say this much: I don't believe in complete healing. I honestly don't think it's possible. Okay? I wish I did. I'm very into Buddhism, as you might have noticed through my conversations with Nick. I don't believe in total enlightenment. I just don't. I don't think it's possible to get to every single trauma, every single mean thing that somebody said to you, every single instance that you were angry, and every bad thing that you did to someone else, right? I don't think it's possible for humans to do that in a single lifetime. And as far as we know, that's all we have, right? You can say you believe in God. Great. You can't prove it. You can say you don't believe in God. Great. You can't prove that either. All that we know beyond a pale of a doubt is that we have this lifetime now. And that's why our obligation to heal ourselves and to live our lives in a way that inspires and enables other people to heal themselves in community with each other, right? Because it's not just about one individual person, being the savior of the world and leading everyone out of the dark night of the soul. That it's not. It doesn't work that way. We need each other, right? But there are leaders. There is a place for leaders in our world. And being a leader has to mean having healed yourself, at least to some extent. Again, I don't even think it's possible to heal yourself completely. So that's not on the table. So we shouldn't, we shouldn't kid ourselves into thinking that, a leader needs to be someone who has healed every single childhood trauma and has healed every single resentment and has healed every single shame within themselves. Like, it's not reasonable to expect that. But what is reasonable to expect is for everyone who is aware to be willing to heal to the fullest extent that they are possible at any given moment in time. You might be, ready to heal the most traumatic thing that ever happened to you one day, and then the next day it's like you don't even want to think about like the angry tweet that you saw the other day about something, and that's too much. It varies from day to day, and it's that's just part of being human. But we're capable of doing something in every moment. And I believe we're obligated to do what that thing is. For the very reason that we are liable to project the same violence and abuse and hatred that has been perpetrated against us onto other people in the world who didn't deserve it at all in the first place. It doesn't matter what someone has done. It doesn't matter if they have done the most terrible thing in the world. It is never okay to abuse someone. It is never okay to use violence against someone, except in cases of immediate self-defense. And again, I believe those cases are exceedingly rare, but they do happen. This is life. It's not a fairy tale. So, I didn't say anything in class, by the way. If you knew me the first semester of my program, then you'll know that I never shut the fuck up in class when there's a discussion. So I'm trying something a little different this time of just listening. But yeah, healing is an obligation. And we need to do it so that we don't continue the cycle of violence. Because this thing has gone on for way too long. Human history is a nightmare. I know that sounds really cynical, but if you look at human history, if you really look at human history, not just the, celebrities and the quirky little weird things that people did in the 1800s to take a shit or whatever, and all the fun facts of history, it's really a nightmare. And it's time for us to take responsibility for it, knowing that we didn't cause it, but that we're responsible for what we do today and the future that we create through our actions now. and that has to involve healing. Real healing. Not just, oh, I went to therapy and then, turn off your brain for the rest of the week. Turn off your heart for the rest of the week. It's not just intellectual. I would say it's probably like 10% of it is intellectual, right? Knowing some, just knowing the very basic psych terms of trauma and mental health and stuff like that. Having a decent vocabulary goes a long way, but it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be anything special. Most of the work is emotional. It's learning to sit with uncomfortable feelings and to feel them, and to not need to do anything about them. I mean, sure, like, you should process it through some sort of somatic, treatment of like, just shaking your hands if things, get to be too much, or like shrugging your shoulders like this. You probably notice I'm like sighing a lot. That's because I'm like, I have a lot of emotions in me as I'm talking right now, right? And nothing's happening. I'm just sitting in my car. But that's how I need to process my emotions, is through my body. So, it's not just intellectual. It's mainly not intellectual. It's felt. It's very much felt through experience. And we have to start doing that more. We have to not just heal ourselves, and not just help other people to heal, right, with their consent. Again, we can't force people to do something that's not, that they're not ready for, even if they need to, even if we need to collectively. But we also need to create a culture that is centered on healing, and that doesn't think it's all just bullshit. It doesn't think it's like, oh, trauma, bro, like, you trigger much? Like, yeah, that's... just shut the fuck up. So, yeah, alright. I'm not being very creative at this point, but yeah, I think I'll end it here. Thank you for listening. This was a hard video to make, honestly. But thank you if you made it this far. Things are really busy right now, so we'll see when I post the next video. I'm gonna try to post more videos like these, because I have all these thoughts in my head, and sorry, I'm just burping my Slurpee. It's good for me to process, and I think maybe someone will find something that they can gain some meaning from if they watch my videos. Probably no one is watching these, honestly, but if you are, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I wish you well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.